Hi there, Monday on Astral Oracles. I'm baking a cake, but I think I can finish this video before we before the timer goes off. And that's of course lovely being back in a place where you can bake things and place books without them rotting, and there's artificial lighting and no wind and stuff. So how nice, right? And at the same time, well, in these places, these very civilized places, we also kind of have the idea that go outside in nature where the lines are more squiggly than this, and where you don't get absorbed in all these artificial realities, but you're kind of brought into immediate reality. It's good for the soul, and if you've been tuning into, I think, me or any kind of spiritual advice, it's pretty generic that, like, how about you go out in nature to get take your socks off, walk on some dirt, and then you'll feel better. And so it has been very interesting for me being in a place where the demonic side of nature was really evident. Without intellectualizing it too much. Of course, the ancients also connected a force like Pan, for instance, but a lot of these more chaotic forces, the idea of the wilderness out there that was kind of inhabited by chaotic forces that you needed to appease and of course also respect. Um, and a lot of folklore revolves around that in interesting ways. But of course, in a place like Europe, but in many places, nature was thoroughly tamed until it arrived at a point where, what we came to associate with nature was kind of the park experience, kind of the English park, orchestrated wilderness. It looks a little wild, but it isn't. It's somebody tending to it, so it looks nice. Um, and that's a complete contrast to being in a wilderness. And of course, on the big island, the side I was on was the southeastern side. We lived just a short drive away from the southernmost point in the US, if you don't count all the territories. But in the States, and so down on that side of Mauna Kea and the mountains is where they get all the precipitation. So it gets 300 inches, I think, of rain a year, and it is a rainforest that's temperate. It has a weird room temperature, so it's seldom too cold and it's seldom too warm. It kind of fluctuates between, sorry for going Celsius here, but like 18 degrees Celsius to 26 degrees Celsius. Room temperature is about 2022. So it's a very, very pleasant, weirdly static mood, and whether the trees, the strawberry guava jungle with some other trees interspersed, kind of acts like an air condition. So if you turn in from the main road, it drops a few degrees, and you can sort of feel the coolness descend. And it also has this effect where if you don't clear the space in the forest, you'll never really see the sun because the canopy takes it up, and that's a weird rainforest effect too. And so Hawaii has a lot of this very chaotic energy, and you can, as far as I understand, I unfortunately haven't visited the other seven islands, um, but they do have these distinct chakra energies, and of course these are fractalized. So each island kind of has its own seven chakras, but then of course also expressed within its main chakra energy, and definitely the big island down south is the root energy island, and it's the one that's still being shaped and formed. And on the eastern slope where we lived was where the lava flows would still crop up and eradicate the land sometimes, and then it would grow over. And I think maybe on my Instagram there are some of the photos of these fascinating down at Kalapana, and like this fascinating jungle landscape that all of a sudden just turns into this black draconic rock. And as a side note, I'd also say that I've received a lot of draconic activations over there, and thank you so much for different people who've been affirming that like prophecies and activations and stuff that they've been getting either in private sessions or through Patreon or through here, that those things are working or activating things, or they're coming true, or lost items are turning up. It's always good to hear that these things are sinking in, and that has to do with the magical concentrated space that we are all entering, is my sense. And my particular experience of it has then been to kind of been moved into this magic concentrated space, this place of knowing myself and my will and my priorities, through a funneling through a very very chaotic natural space, a place where the demonic aspect of the natural was very vivid and very present. And so on the lot where we lived, not the lot we were cultivating, but the one we stayed at, um, there was so many presences, and in particular there was this kind of think of it as an Easter Island faced dude, but this weird woodland spirit, elfin dude who was definitely not satisfied with the turbulence and the breaking of the ley lines, and the placement of the buildings. And in those buildings, the guy who built them, he had I think a 2x4 taken to the back of his head after getting, it was a pretty druggy area, so like getting involved with methods or something. And it kind of, and then the people who bought it, who we were renting them from, he was also kind of like a weird, not straightforward dude, and his dad was living at the next side, and he was completely demented, like Alzheimer's. So what, it was a very very sweet man, but would also of course behave slightly erratically, I'd say. And so the entire mood there was one of really intensifying craziness. And so like go to the go to the woods, they say it'll be good, they say. Yeah, except if it's inhabited by like weird malignant elfin spirits who really don't want you there. um, and it's interesting in that jungle because it's so parceled out that there were also places where were over at her lot, Money had built a mini honey hut, and kind of cleared. She had a cave there and cleared those spaces, and there the dragons and the little people were very happy. And there were some other places where energies weren't quite right, and cats kept shitting and stuff. So like it kind of had this weird, very 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 receptive energy to it. And what you found on the big island was also that it kind of got to people's minds. And I'm sorry if this will probably be offensive somehow. There's no way not to be offensive when you're essentially saying that the place that people are living in is making them stupid. But that was kind of the case. That like I'm sorry, I am a very intellectual person. Like I approach the world through very mental energies, for better or worse, and kind of being in a place where I could feel that my own mental faculties were slowly degrading. It was like the energy simply wouldn't allow for clear thoughts to be produced. And the people you came across, Punatics, they call them, that live down in that area of Puna, they were all like some kind of crazy, like some kind of where you just, yeah. And it's almost hard to describe, but like the sense where they were captured by this circular sense of irrationality that permeated everything. And the island had a very, very captivating energy like that, this weird circular energy. It kind of has three main roads. So you can go down south, you can go up, you can go down up north, or you can go across it through Saddle Road, and across the mountain. And those are kind of your three options. And you can keep going around that island. We went a few times, and see the landscapes changing from kind of one magic place to another. And it's the weirdest because down in Pune, the energies are very, very elfin, forest energies, like weird ancient Lemurian spirits and things that are even more ancient somehow. Um, that I really connect with the Fae a lot. And then if you go up to Waimea and more the northern stretches, you'll get to something that's very alien like where and I promise I'll do videos on the lights I saw there and stuff, but that's also very different, and up at the volcano where you can see the eruptions, and the energies are arcane, also fairly alien, more Pleiadian, I'd say. So it's almost also as some of the alien connectives are connected to some of the spaces. It's a very special place, but it's also completely hypnotic. Um, and so I think, for instance, we these trips and what's with Americans and cars, that's another thing. But we did these trips around the island where I kind of realized that we could also have crossed the continental United States. So we could have gone driven to Spain or Greece or something like incredibly far away to my mind. But instead, you just kind of go around and keep circling this weird space, like it's always promising something that doesn't seem to quite materialize. And this is essentially the frequency of the root chakra, right? Like it's raw energy, so of course it's not materializing. It's essentially it's just making itself available to be worked with, and it's a very cute place to be as a channeler. I'd say it's also a little much, uh, but you can kind of almost map like, okay, here are different tribes of Menehunis, and like the first evening I got there, and sitting around in over at the west coast over Kona side in the more desert, like palm land, what you think of when you think of the Hawaiian Islands, and you can kind of see these little people taking around. That's just how it is. And when I see these things, they are like more like energetic outlines, but they're clearly there in intention and energy wise, and that is quite special. I'll also say it's quite maddening. That is the essential vibration is one uh, of kind of madness, and of course that's the strife between the strife between the serpent and the bird of prey, right? Like that's if the bird of prey isn't regulating the serpent, then it just becomes this weird mad voracious energy, and there was something, I'd say, slightly thirsty, desperate, weirdly hungry about people who stayed over there, where they call it talking story in Hawaii, and I know I've been noticing it before, but like the way that people seize on your attention, and then it's like, okay, now if I can, I'll use 20 minutes of your time to tell you my life story, because it's somehow important to me, and I don't understand why people would do that, but that's probably because I come from a weird culture where we don't do that. But it's kind of the idea again that there's this weird kind of mental uh, attention deficit, and when people come in contact with it, because there's so much energy, there's so much intent, there's so much life that actually wants to take shape, that you kind of get that feeling, which I think is interesting. And so partially it's therapeutic for me to map these things out, and I think it's interesting for those of you who are interested in this and working with energy. But it also speaks to like these maddening spaces. It's called the magic mirror in English. English doesn't have as many of these like archaic, witchy words as continental Germanic. So I think it's Zauberspiegel in German, that witchy or sorcered mirror. bewitched mirror. And in Danish we call it troldspejl, which means the troll mirror. But and that is magic is the verb trylle is kind of related to the trolls and this magic sphere, and the idea is of course that it's this weird space where you are kind of labyrinthine space where you're called into and you're drawn into it, and there's a definite seduction taking place that's often connected with magic performances, like weird beautiful elfin girls, and of course to me that was fairly concrete, but like this sense of like an underworld that captivates you and that doesn't want to let you go. And I'd really like to get some guidance and input on this after this long talk. And so I think I'll speak to Guan Yin simply because I trust her a lot and I love her a lot. So I hope this serves you guys, and much love to you out there. Speaking to you from immovable crystalline spheres, I greet you, Guan Yin, on high, and I move forward to answering your question of these magical spaces. This geography that you point to, this partially sacred, partially bewitched, partially demonic space of borderline experience. These portals, they were once open many places on your planet, and now they are reopening. And so many of you have been kept away from nature, or you have kept yourself away from nature, however you want to look at it. You may think of the stars more as distant ideas and phenomenon, rather the things that actually light up your night and the darkness that naturally follows it. You may think of the outside as something you go to breathe in once in a while, but not something that surrounds you and sustains you. And so this does have a certain witchy appeal to it. That is, the outside space is in and of itself a place where you can open a portal simply by allowing yourself to be for a long time. All of you would find that you would meet these woodland sprites or other beings if you simply relocated yourself to these woodlands for a long time. You could of course go there and then build certain parameters around yourself, or bring your own ego constructs with you to a degree where you wouldn't experience them. But if you are receptive, then in the woods there are also certain what ifs and would you if only. That is, you are being beckoned by nature also to return to it. And this nature, it wants the stewardship to be returned to it. You may sense there is a certain minority of your species that are not called to leave this planet, but are called to merge back into the natural world, to become much as those beings, as the Fendorians or other beings who live in the chiral dimensions, to become far more elfin. Those creatures you sense, those people that you were slightly hesitant, and shame on you, our friend, on calling those people stupid that sought out that island. Well, it is not stupidity, but it is a type of, let's call it, non-mental thinking. That is, it's a slower type of existence that circulates, that almost emulsifies the strategies of the personality and makes them more possessed by certain natural spirits. That is the idea of the Lemurian race that is returning to you at this moment. Well, many of these were essentially pygmies, menehunis, dwarfs, other small peoples who, well, had learned to move into an accelerated space of time. And so they jumped, it would seem, from a linear perspective, from one time to another. And now they are facing back in those spaces where they can face in the most. Volcanic islands are particularly helpful to this. There may also be here the activation of certain types of draconic DNA that also needs to be explored, but here you may sense that these different types of activations or possessions, it is not necessarily stupidity, but it is a type of crystalline possession. And this requires to circumvent the analytical mind of the personality. And so, moving into an energy center like this, the analytical mind of the personality becomes gradually attuned. We could even say broken up and pieced together again in a different frequency spectrum. That is, there is both a frequency alignment of lower mind and there is a frequency of higher mind. The problem then arises, what you diagnose as stupidity, is that the lower mind remains connected to the physical awareness while the higher mind becomes disconnected. That is, in this sense of possession, you may sense that these people become more like crystalline energy portals for higher agendas. These higher agendas are being programmed into the high mind of the human collective. They are at this moment not necessarily very powerful, but you will see certain grid structures of healing beginning to emerge. There are certain temples in the ethers that are beginning to open. There are certain buildings there that are beginning to become clear and vivid for humanity. So we sense within this message that was, to our mind, quite straightforward. There was a lot of information given and many channelings to come, many entities you may want to contact and bring forward have already arisen in the ethers and are presenting themselves. They wish to also give their testimony and statement to this great awakening and what is taking place. And so allow for the processes to come forward and flow as they need to in your life with the discernment of what is your core frequency. And with the discernment of your core frequency, you will also come into your core alignment, your core being, your purpose, and your breath present as the gift it always is. The ins and outs of creation, they flow together in you in one unified being of harmony and love. I, Guan Yin, I bid you guidance, consolation, support, blessings, healing, and love this day, and I bid you farewell. That's the cake. Isn't that beautiful, guys? I hope may you also have cake and good times out there. Much love.